All right. As everyone comes in, I'm going to go ahead and start today's panel. But hi, everyone. My name is Terrence. I'm one of the co-organizers for our Fireside Chat event on how to market yourself for tech jobs. I just want to, before we begin, start to, lay out some house rules. First, today's program will be recorded. Anyone who speaks during the Fireside Chat, for example, to verbally ask a question or make a comment, is agreeing to be recorded and is granting permission for the recording to be posted on our Slack channel. Today's discussion will be an unstructured panel involving conversation between our speakers and attendees. Fireside Chats are meant to replicate an intimate group discussion. So at any time, you may unmute yourself and say your questions or comments aloud. And you may also use the chat function to share your question and comments as well if you prefer. Please just be respectful of each other's comments, questions, and perspectives. With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Tonight, we have Dr. Christine Moberg, private practice and founding team member of WAVE. Dr. Aloia, global lead, behavioral change at Philips HealthTech and part-time faculty at National Jewish Health. And Dr. Dave Cooper, director, global mental health at Teladoc Health. Today, we'll start by having each speaker briefly share their training background, their current job roles, and how they each transition into tech. I'd like to start things off with Dr. Moberg.
Hey everybody, glad to be here. My name is Christine Moberg. I did my graduate training at University of Wisconsin-Madison in clinical psychology, internship at the Palo Alto VA, and then postdoc at Stanford. During my time at Stanford, I first got connected into the mental health tech space doing consulting for a startup that was pre-launch. Did that for about 2 years, took a job at the VA, and then after they raised a round, was able to go on staff there for 2 more years until we were acquired by United Health. After that acquisition, I transitioned into a chief science officer role at an emotional well-being nonprofit. Was there for about a year. We were doing a lot of, or my role was a lot of sort of like mobile measurement, so looking at ways that we can use apps to measure well-being. The first app, by the way, was like CBT, ACT, mindfulness. That product still exists in a new skin. And then now I'm sort of co-founding a company called WAVE that's young adult focused emotional well-being platform and doing like content and advising on some like science and strategy things. So, and then I also do private practice. So happy to chat.
Great to have you, Dr. Moberg. Next, I have Dr. Cooper.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm David Cooper. I started off not in healthcare or anything with that undergraduate-wise, then had that wonderful quarter-life crisis that so many of us had. Went back to graduate school, fully intending on hanging out a shingle and being a therapist. But right as I was graduating, smartphones came out, and I was looking at my patients, looking at smartphones, and saying, I wish there were people in our field smarter about this sort of stuff. We could do a lot of good for patients. So I got hooked up with a group out here on the West Coast and spent 6 years developing apps for service members through the Department of Defense, working with the VA, building apps, doing translational research, UX, training and education, all that wonderful fun stuff that goes into apps. After that, I said, okay, great. Now I know how to build these things. How do we sustain them? What's the business side of things? So left the DoD, went and joined a startup called Zelf, worked with a lot of different digital health companies over about 3.5 years. But because of the pandemic, because of communities like therapists and tech, I was like, I really miss behavioral health. I need to come back. I need to bring back what I've learned. So for the past couple months, I've been at Teladoc, leading up our global mental health efforts as we roll products out across the globe.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. and Dr. Aloia.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. My name is Mark Aloia. I'm happy to be here and want to thank you all for attending. So my background is in clinical psychology and with specializations in neuropsych and health psych. I too worked at a VA for a while, so apparently there's some commonality here amongst the speakers. I'll skip the training, but was faculty at Brown for a decade and just doing the academic stuff and then clinical work because you never just do one or the other. Been NIH funded for about 20 years. This is the first year I've not been PI on an NIH grant. And then about 15 years ago, I was asked to join a company called Respironics that makes sleep therapy, so CPAP devices. And I had published a lot on adherence to CPAP. Why CPAP? Because it was the first wearable device. So I was just really applying motivational interviewing to improve adherence to a health behavior, and that was a good health behavior target. So I think this company wanted someone, they wanted to improve adherence, but they didn't know where to put that person in their org chart. So I was invited in to be director of research. So I directed research for this company for 8 years, and in the background helped them build the first mobile application for CPAP patients, which improved adherence by over 20%. So we were really excited about that. I should say that about 8 months into my being there, Philips bought us, big company out of Amsterdam that has multiple companies associated with it. And then they saw what we did with behavior change and engagement and said, we need that across our silos. So that's when I transitioned over into this role of global lead for behavior change, which is a mouthful. And I have to be blamed for that because they asked me to come up with a title. So I probably should have put the word engagement in, but I didn't. So I've been doing that all told for 15 years, been doing both NIH research, just one grant at a time, and then this industry work. I'm now actually interviewing for other jobs and just got an offer the other day. So I'm thinking about making a transition again myself. So I'm kind of in the thick of it, like maybe many of you.
And thank you to all speakers for introducing yourselves. And now I'd just like to open it up to the audience. Please feel welcome to voice your questions, either aloud or in the chat.
Don't be shy. I wore my most startup appropriate outfit. I intentionally dressed with like the vest and the button-up shirt and like looked very startup today. So please take advantage of my ensemble.
So I'll just say and then mute myself again because I'm making my son lunch. But I'm Alin Barrera and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've mostly been doing online and text messaging research with pregnant and postpartum individuals with an emphasis on Spanish-speaking and BIPOC populations, and I finally am joining one of these because I keep seeing it in my feed. So nice to meet you all. I'm curious. I'm a faculty member at Palo Alto University, and I'm just curious to hear what you all have to say. And your advertisements worked, and so here I am. So nice to meet you all.
Great. Thank you for that comment.
I have a question. I'm Jody Mulder. I'm an LCSW. I'm here in Santa Cruz. And I come out of a university counseling center background, so I'm curious. I know, Christine, you had said you worked at Stanford. I think one of the challenges I'm having, I worked in university mental health for about 12 years, and now I have a private practice, and I feel like I have a lot to offer. I see myself as a pretty strong clinician, and I see college counseling centers as pretty cross-functional units where you're doing a lot of different things that could translate into the tech role. But I'm having a hard time getting traction. I don't know if it's sort of how my resume is set up or how I'm promoted. So I guess just curious, how do you take sort of that brick and mortar, kind of you're working in this cross-functional, you're doing a lot of similar things, I think, and how what we're trying to create in tech companies, but kind of translating it into that space.
One question to answer your question is, what kind of jobs have you been sort of looking at that you feel like you're not getting great traction? What sort of job titles are they?
Well, I started looking a bit at content roles. I was recommended to someone to look there. I was also suggested to look at recruiter roles, sort of like looking at doing provider recruitment for telehealth. It seems though that many of them are looking for recruiter backgrounds. I looked at some clinical director type roles for some of the telehealth, like 2 chairs, had some. And then I also looked at some training and development for care teams. Like I know Lyra has a posting now. So maybe that's it. I don't feel like I know exactly kind of where I fit. I know I'm a seasoned professional. I'm like 20 years post, master's, but I've not worked in tech. I've been in these other pockets doing work. So maybe that's part of it, is finding where I fit to come into the space.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm, obviously I'll give the others an opportunity to speak as well. I think figuring out what you want to do is probably step one, and then sort of adjusting the way that you present your previous experiences to better match that. So like if it's a clinic director or a provider recruiting, you're thinking about operations and like what are all the times that you've done things that involve managing people and looking at budgets and looking at that kind of stuff, and then you sort of highlight that in your cover letter and in your CV. Or if it's content, maybe you include something that you've written, or really dig in on the specifics of training that you've had, or which modalities you're most passionate about, or something like that. If it's something more sort of program evaluation oriented, think about the times that I'm sure at your, college counseling center, there was performance improvement projects that you did, and sort of like pulling that out as, oh, I learned this thing and I'm passionate about that thing. And it's totally true that you probably have experience doing all of these things, but you have to sort of like put that in the face of the person that's going to be reading that resume or that cover letter.
Yeah, absolutely. And for folks who may be new to like the search, we've talked a little bit about it, but I always like to point people to sort of like maybe one of 4 areas in terms of jobs. The first is product, like product manager, product, whatever. And that's the person who's making the tools, incorporating user feedback, working with developers, working with design, kind of just playing kind of the central coordinator of the whole product. The second is there's sort of clinical roles, and I think we talked, that could be individual clinician, it could be clinical director, it could be clinical operations, either somebody who's delivering care, setting standards, recruiting provider panels. All of those, the clinical jobs tend to kind of fall into another bucket. A third bucket is data. So essentially that's data science, research, really the practical application of research. How do we know what we know, and what can we do with that information to kind of work very closely with product and make things better. And then the fourth bucket or area is usually content, and that's translating research and evidence-based practice into engagement. Really, like, how do I help people understand these concepts? How do I help kind of bring them back into the product? So just wanted to kind of set the stage there, as far as those are the 4 big buckets that I tend to point people at. But also, just to kind of piggyback on the specific question, as somebody, if I'm hiring somebody, it really is in tech much more so than clinical work or research, showing that you have done the work or you're trying to do the work, right? I kind of need to know, and it's great because you can just make a blog if you want a content piece, right? You can, like, you take a Code Academy thing if you want to learn product and learn how that works. But I need to have some kind of, like, I know that you have a lot of skills, but you gotta kind of help me and letting me know that you're at least interested in kind of the role that you're looking for, or have done those kinds of things.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I would just say you probably have all the skills for all those buckets, maybe not product in particular, and so that does make it harder, right? Because your resume may not show that. It may be sort of a broad swath of your capabilities, but not focused enough. I've run into this myself. I mean, I kind of defensively fell into industry. Like I didn't want to work for industry, and then I kind of thought, well, and this was 15 years ago, so I kind of thought, I can sit in my ivory tower and bitch about it, or I can get involved and try to shape it. And so I reluctantly went into it. So they wanted me for what I had already published and what I had already shown. Since when I've been looking at jobs, it's been much harder. And I think that that's reflective of the fact that maybe I didn't put enough time in focusing that resume, but also probably reflective, I guess, I have no evidence of this, of the fact that it's gotten harder to get into these positions. You know, there are more people out there, and a lot of the people hiring don't really know what they want in terms of a clinician. You know, they kind of want you to say the words that resonate with them, but nobody really tells you what that is. So, you know, I think that these guys have given great advice. I really don't have much to add to that.
Hi, I do have a question. My name is Taza Ware. I'm located here in Middle Tennessee. I've been in the tech industry for about 4 years now. My current position, I work for an online education company. We support teachers, families, and students. I'm also a full-time clinical mental health student right now, graduating soon with my Ed.S. People in the company, including people on HR, on the HR team, have heard that I'm in this program, and they have been like, that sounds so great. It seems like you have a lot of things to add to our company, especially like, you know, sharing insights internally and externally. So I've basically been tasked to come up with basically a pitch on how a role can be created for me. It sounds like they're open to that, but what are some things or advice that you would give to kind of like get those pointers, or how can a role be created in a tech company that already exists, that you're already a part of, that currently don't have any type of behavioral health, mental health needs right now?
So I'll take a little stab at that, since that's kind of what I did for my job. They asked me to create this role. And I remember the anxiety around that, right? Because this is my opportunity, and I don't want to screw it up. But how far do I go? So what I did was I actually just talked to the couple of people who I had dual reporting if I were to go into this role. And they were two separate businesses, so I knew that they had probably different perspectives. One was a business I was already in, and the other was sort of producing something that was different. And I looked for the commonalities, and I just sort of, you know, I had dialogues with them, asked them what they would imagine, what they would like, what KPIs they'd be interested in, what excites you about what I'm doing, right? So you're doing something different that made them excited about it. What is it? You know, what is it that excites you about that? What are you thinking? Where do you see it going? And not to say that you're going to put all of that into your job description, but I would want to know what the stakeholders, where they see the value. And so some of that then goes in your job description, and then you fashion it in a way that really sort of meets you where you are, right? So the title is somewhat important because you may not be there forever, and then you're gonna, you know, be pitching yourself to someone else. And so that's why I said I wish I would have put engagement instead of behavior change, because I quickly learned that everyone in industry loves behavior change, but they don't always have money to put behind it. But if you tell them it's engagement, they love it even more, and they have money to put behind it. So, you know, you can sort of think about fashioning that title the way you want it, and some of the KPIs that you want to meet. But I think it really has to do with using your clinical skill and having those dialogues with the right stakeholders. At least that's my belief. And then being true to your own heart and seeing if you can make all of that happen in one job description, then congratulations, like that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, Toja, as a boy from West Tennessee, I will tell you, you are in a lucky, that sounds like such a great place to be, that you get to really design what you want to do. And I advise you to be as sneaky as you possibly can and design the job around whatever you enjoy the most, whatever you feel that you are the best at, and whatever kinds of things you really want to learn. Yeah, drop that in the job description. Like, go out and find, you know, troll on LinkedIn and find like jobs that sound cool to you and just copy and paste that stuff into your own job description. Top secret, that's what we all do when we have to come up with a job description, is we go on LinkedIn and we find other job descriptions and we just copy and paste. FYI. But like, that's a great place to be in. That's awesome. Good luck.
I only have one thing to add, which is to Mark's point about your title. It will be very tempting to come up with a really baller title. Don't do that, because like my job where I was chief science officer, like, was so absurd. It was like a 26-person nonprofit. It shouldn't have been called that, and it made it harder later to, because people look at that and they're like, oh, you must have been blah blah blah, such an executive, and you must have these really high salary expectations. And like, I think it hurt me, actually. So don't give in to that urge to like have something grandiose for your title.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Just have it be accurate. Don't sell yourself short, but just make it what you think it is. And they'll probably have some input on whether that's director, manager, whatever it is, if you're doing those things. But
Thank you, Adam.
Hi, I'm Adele. I am a licensed therapist in Georgia and an industrial organizational psychologist. I work in government. I've also worked in the community and healthcare. And so I've gotten pretty clear. So kind of like piggybacking off of what Jody shared earlier, I have gotten clear that I know I want to go into the digital like health space, just because I just feel that it'll be an easier transition, fingers crossed, for me, considering that I am a clinician and have experience in IO. My current role, I work in government as a workforce development manager, and funny enough, like, it was a role that they found out I was leaving and I was in school, and they were like, hey, let's create something for you, like, you can stay. And so I did that and tried to be as less clinicianish with my title that I could be, because I do work for the Department of Behavioral Health, so it's a lot of like clinical titles that go into that. So my question is, I think I've done a decent job with emphasis on think, that I've done a decent job with the variations of my resume, trying to make a lot of skills transferable and not too clinical. But I'm obviously not that sure. I'm early in my search, so about 2 months in, and I was wondering, did you all just organically fall into it, or like know individuals? Of course, relationships are everything. Or is there like a headhunter or recruiter services that actually are pretty tailored to this group of individuals that are moving in from traditional clinician world into like that digital health space?
I don't know of any recruiters specifically. If anybody knows, let me know, because hey, you never know. It's good to find new gigs. I think you're going about it the right way. I think sometimes it goes quick and sometimes it goes fast. I always say, like, there's 3 things that you need as you're making the transition. And the good news is you already have 2 out of the 3, right? Ability, evidence, and a network, right? You already, all by virtue of, having gone through training, having gone through clinical programs, you already have the ability, right? You have the ability to learn new things quickly. You have transferable skills. Network, right? You have a network. Therapists and tech, any door is easier to open when you know somebody's on the other side, right? Like, use the TNT network. That's kind of what we're here for. Hopefully this is letting you know none of us are very scary people who are very unapproachable. Yeah, just reach out. Hey, do you know anybody here? Or reach out on the Slack and the Ask channel. It's really what it's there for. The trickiest part, I think, is the evidence, and I think we talked a little bit about that with Jody's question. Is I need to know you can actually do the work, right? But I mean, the good news there is, again, in tech, there's not like the same amount of sort of gatekeeping, I'd say, on like the research or the clinical side when it comes to evidence. You're not going to have to like, oh, what's your H index? You know, how many patients have you seen? How many therapy hours do you have? And you got to wait until you have like thousands of hours before you move on to the next step. I mean, you can write a blog article or two on the weekends. You can take a, you know, academy and put something up on GitHub. You can easily kind of show that evidence. And there's really, I mean, they just want to know, like, do you kind of know this stuff? So, I mean, that's the advice that I would offer. I will defer to my distinguished colleagues who probably have smarter things to say.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think it's getting harder because a lot of the space is consolidating. Like when I got into this was literally dumb luck, like just, you know, someone who knew someone, and I happened to be a good sort of personality match for the founders of the company. And then, you know, a snowball rolls downhill. It just gets easier each time you've done one of these jobs and you have sort of those skills. I think the reason it's getting harder is as these companies are consolidating, there are, you know, a lot of us are like, oh, I love this intervention, but like, how can we make it digital in a way that's going to be cool and engaging? And like, there's just not that many new companies that are going to have a role where you can sit there and like translate an evidence-based intervention into something digital. And so I think a lot of these positions are becoming, you know, being a telehealth provider or managing telehealth providers or sort of supervising, you know, people that have a different licensure than you perhaps. So I don't know if this is amazing advice. I might be inclined to kind of look for a foot in the door type of position where like maybe it isn't your dream job, but like you really like the company or you really like the mission, and it's going to give you the opportunity to get that experience in the digital space that you can then sort of lever later, or maybe they'll have a different position open up or something like that where, okay, maybe I don't really want to just be a telehealth provider for X tech company, but it would be a step in that direction and would give you some of that cred that David's talking about of showing like, hey, I actually want and have this experience in this space. So, you know, I might be inclined to sort of like look for something in that role where you're making a bit of a compromise just to get that foot in the door. But
yeah, you know, let me just build a little bit on that. There are a couple things, Adele, that I heard, and I may have heard them wrong, but I don't want you to be defensive against your clinical skill. Like, I want you to embrace your clinical skill. So how do you do that, right? So I just want to point out that when you're looking at digital mental health versus digital health, fundamentally different, right? In digital health, you're going to have very few people with your clinical skill, and you're going to be, and you want to use that as a differentiator. So I find that there are few psychologists in the digital health space, and you're going to be unique. You're going to be a unicorn, and you have to convince people that that's valuable to them. And that's not that hard to do. And that's when I use the fact that we have thousands of hours of therapy, you know, sitting down with patients. In Philips, we have 30 or so psychologists in Europe, but I don't think any of them have seen a patient, right? So that's the differentiator. Mm-hmm. I always tell the story about when I sat down with a patient, I was half excited and half terrified, and then after 10 minutes I was fully terrified, right? So it's what you learn through that experience that makes you unique. So, and then I think pulling on what Christine said, maybe you can think about what you really want, but then also think about what you would get, right? What is the job that someone would say, oh, she's absolutely qualified for that job, we want her. And then it's kind of how I played the grant game. I went after what I wanted, and I went after what I thought I could get, and then when one hit, that's the line I took, right? So it's just, I think that's good advice from my colleagues, and I just don't want you to be defensive about your clinical skill. I'm not saying you were, but I just heard a little bit too much of apology about that. Like,
no, thank you for that, because I think that I'll take a little bit of each of this. I just joined TNT, so I think I want someone to just like look at my resume. I had like a short-lived win because I was like, hey, my resume looks good to me, and then of course like going off of different resources and stuff like that. So I had like a short-lived win where like I look for jobs like employee engagement, workforce, organizational, people type stuff, because the way I just explain it to individuals, like I always just marrying the worlds of psychology and HR. And so I had a short-lived win where like I applied for a job within 12 hours, a recruiter reached out to me. And so I was like, oh yay, like it got through. And then she was like, oh, she canceled the interview because she was like, oh, they were looking for someone with startup experience. The hiring manager just told me. And it wasn't in the description. And I'm like, the closest transferable skill I have to startup is in government, which is a federal grant. So it's like I feel like felt good from the aspect of like, okay, someone looked at it, so it obviously wasn't like terrible. They were able to, a recruiter that's not in my area was able to like look at it and say like, okay, I think she would be a good fit. But then it was just like, okay. So I'm definitely probably gonna reach out just to see if anyone has services where they'll look at, my resume or just to make sure I'm going down the right path. I feel like I am. And like you said, I used to be pretty defensive about the clinical skills. So I was like, oh, they're just going to see me as a clinician that, has a PhD in IO. But I've definitely learned to come to enjoy and appreciate that part and just make it so that someone on the other end would be able to appreciate it as well. So thank you for that.
We're just having a conversation in the chat about non-clinician sort of data science things. Alexandra, so I'll just throw this out there. I had someone on my team whose title was behavioral scientist, and literally everything she did was data science. And she took a couple of boot camp courses, went and doubled her salary, going to a different, it just, you're so close, like don't sell yourself short. So I would just, change your search terms, learn a few more skills, and you'll be able to do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I've been tempted to do that. And then I was wondering like, oh, is that going to take me too far away from what I really love to do, which is like study design? And
no, there are lots of companies that still 100% need that. We just, as psychologists, don't think of ourselves in that way, but like people with good statistical training are very much data scientists. It's just,
and I'll say we hired those people in our research group, for sure. We had I had 30 employees under me, all doing, we had a $10 million budget, over 100 clinical trials going on. We had people writing the protocols. We had other people who would go out to sites and monitor, consent forms. And we needed people like that. Now, we often found, people with PhDs were overqualified for some of those positions, but we've absolutely found those people at director levels and now senior director levels, making quite good money and doing research design, interfacing with KOLs. But that doesn't happen usually in a startup. Those are in, big research organizations or big companies that have their own research organizations.
I think that that's really similar to kind of my question, given the position I'm in right now. I'm a clinical psych postdoc who's also done training at a number of VAs. I'm at a non-VA veteran-centric program with a heavy background in research and statistics, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to continue in the research, grant-funded academic medical center route, or make that transition over to applied research and tech. And it sounds like some of you have had some experience with that, and I'm wondering what guidance you might give someone who's very early career trying to make those decisions.
I think a lot of people have been in your shoes. Not me personally, but a lot of people that I've been friends with or talked to. Mark, do you want to start as someone who was in academia? Or?
I can tell you that. So I wasn't early in my career. I was an associate professor, and I had, grants for many years. And I didn't know if I wanted to go over to industry. I didn't know what that was going to be like. And so, I came up with, when I was offered this position, I came up with all these qualifiers. Well, I have to stay in Colorado, and I have to keep my grants, and and we're going to publish everything. And the chief medical officer, who was a buddy of mine, or a colleague at least, said, of course, so then I had to take the job. So for me, I wanted to keep both going. And it also gave me credibility in my workplace, like they didn't want to get rid of the person who was still publishing and interfacing with key opinion leaders and so forth. So that credibility was a good thing. I think you have a great skill set, and the stat piece is huge. I could see someone like you coming in to a senior manager or director position in that big research organization I talked about. And what's the difference between senior manager and director? Probably dependent on how much they'd rely on your skills. If you were doing the stats, I'd be pushing for a higher level, unless they already had a biostatistician. So we had a group that didn't have a biostatistician, and we took one of our people who was just mathematically oriented and interested and said, here, go take stats courses and become the biostatistician. So you could jump into an organization like that pretty easily, but that was a clinical research organization, right? And if you went into a standalone clinical research organization, there are probably half a dozen of you. So it's just a matter of sort of finding your right fit, looking around and keeping your eyes open. And if you're doing grant work, it might be good to think about doing some grant work that's funded by industry, because then you start to build some of those relationships and see what those look like.
I'll add on to Mark's point, as far as research, focusing down is absolutely one way to go, and the other way I've seen is to widen up, especially as you move from academia into tech. Being more multidisciplinary in what you're looking at, what are the things you're looking for. I remember this is an old anecdote of mine, but I was talking to a researcher and they were describing their next study that they were getting funded for, and I said, they're talking to me, I was like, oh, that sounds like a multi-arm banded A/B test. And they were like, well, what is that? And I was explaining, well, that's what Amazon uses to kind of do the front page. And he was like, well, where do they publish? And I'm like, they don't. They do it. It works. They make $1 million. Like, that's their data. That's their evidence. And you're going to, have to look at some of the tech blogs and things like that to find some of that stuff. But that can be another way to go. Again, both are equally valid. It just kind of depends on your own person, like any job, right? Like, you want to be more of a generalist or a specialist. Same thing applies to tech.
Hi. Sorry. Let me just answer this question in the chat, just because I don't feel like typing. Let me be real quick. So Rachel asked, how do you discern sort of good companies to work for or not? I think it really depends on what you're trying to optimize for. So one thing that I think a lot of us don't know is sort of the business end, and what is a burn rate, and how soon is this company going to go out of business, and do they have really good VCs, or are you a lot of psychologists are very risk averse and are not going to be comfortable in a teeny tiny startup that might fold soon. I think you could also think about, is this super mission aligned, or do you really care about the culture of the people? All of those things matter in a job. And so I think things that I do is I look at Crunchbase, which is a great website to see how much funding. I have a good friend who had this job and was all excited, and then just 6 months in got fired, and it was very obvious they ran out of money, and it was not anything that my friend had done. But in terms of offerings that are sort of overlapping, you can spend a lot of time on their website, looking at the App Store, reading reviews, do your diligence to see, do people really like this product? That's just going to give you a hunch, but it can be helpful to be oh, am I going to be excited to further this company's mission, or does it just, is this my foot in the door job?
Yeah, and I would add to that, depends on where you are in your career, right?
Yeah.
For me right now, I'm not going to take a job if I don't like the mission and the vision. That's just because I've got a good job, right? and I'm fine. So, but I'd be happy to contribute to a bigger mission or vision, and the culture. Absolutely. Yeah. Someone says, and a team. Absolutely. I want to know that I'll fit in with this group.
Yeah.
And absolutely use your network. Digital health is small enough. Digital behavioral health is still small enough that most of us either know people or know people, but I may not be able to tell you whether or not a company is good, but you better believe a lot of us keep lists of companies that are bad, so we can at least warn you off in that regard.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a quick story. I interviewed with a company, and the hiring person, the person I would have reported to, was a psychologist. And I had spoken with that person before in another realm, in another sort of space. And I had reached out to that person because I had known him. And I said, what about this job? Is this for, this level of person? This is, me, and that's where I'm at. And yes, I think you should apply. Never was able to interview with that person. That person never reached out to me. I had to go through 7 other interviews. I had to give a presentation to that person, and then found out I didn't get the job. And so to me, that process was emblematic of the culture. And I thought, I kept saying to myself, if it were me, I would just, there's only 2 psychologists here. I would reach out and say, hey, how's it going? Here's what you can expect. I won't be talking to you for a while, but, you'll meet these people. And so that kind of thing is, pay attention to the process. If red flags are coming up all over the place, pay attention to the red flags. Don't be overly anxious, but don't be unaware.
Thank you
Hi.
so much. That was very helpful.
Yeah, hi, my name is Laura Booker. I'm in New York City. I'm primarily in private practice with some nonprofit background. I specialize in working with LGBTQ young people. Have about 20 years of experience with that. And so I'm really new to this conversation, so I hope I'm asking, you'll excuse me if the questions aren't exactly right. But so, I've been sitting in my office for the past 15 years, and I'm looking at the 3 things you need to transition: the ability, evidence, and network. And I think I have the ability and I have the network, but because most of my work has taken place in private practice setting, I don't have a ton of evidence. My ideal is to be able to take the expertise that I've gathered these past 2 decades and move into some kind of like consultant or content role. I guess I'm just wondering if you have any advice on how to go about that.
I mean, I think the main thing is just do it. Look for all of the job. You can do a search. I think Therapist in Tech has a Airtable page, and you can probably search for content, and just kind of look at the companies that come up, and they'll say, this is for kids, or this is for postpartum women, or this is for veterans, and find the ones that resonate with you, and give them a good writing sample.
If I can just jump in, Christine, Laura, I'm pretty sure there was something just on TNT Jobs, like very recently, that you're great for. I'll try and find it and DM you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice of you. And so do those kind of positions exist where you can go into a company either as a consultant or on a short-time basis and sort of talk with them about, all right, how you want to serve this particular population, and here's things that you might want to consider?
Yeah,
So
I hired content writers.
Yeah, and there's there's also a company we used. I don't know how good it would be for you to do this, but called Contently. That they give a bunch of they just put out a bunch of ideas and content, and people write content and stuff. That could just at least get you some quote experience, some evidence. The other thing is, I might think about this. There's no stupid question, Laura, but this might be a stupid answer. So the other thing I might think about is going into industry and offering to give talks to people about what you do, right? So kind of like a consultant, but you're giving talks to people who are parents of these kids. Right?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of training experience.
If you show connection.
Yeah, working in schools and different organizations, and done a ton of training. I've just not had any inroads like in the tech industry in that way.
And I think it's almost just like making the case that you can in the tech world is the place to start. And then, I've gotten some consulting gigs, but usually it's just because of the stuff I've done, and they've seen me give a talk somewhere and then, hey, can you consult on this? I haven't really solicited them, so I can't really guide you on that, but someone would read my article, or like David said, read your blog or something like that, and they might want a consultation on it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I was going to say, Therapists in Tech. We've I've got a Medium publication. You want to write for that? Let's like write stuff. Like I'm looking for like I'd love to have a job search series, or again, like that would be a great place to put out a series of content on. If you're trying to work with this population, these are the things you as a digital health company need to consider. Like the ways to kind of piggyback on people that already have a network or that are already getting looked at, or there's already a bunch of people. That's a great way to do it. It's totally free, and I'm sure we like content just as much as everybody else. So, you know, send it our way, and or, you know, throw up a one-page website. This is who I am. This is what I do. You've got a couple talks, throw them up on YouTube and link them, and just start doing it that way. It really is. I mean, for good or for both good and for ill, sometimes it really is what you can convince people that you can do,
Yeah.
and what you get to do.
Yeah, I'll say like a lot of us that go into this field are very uncomfortable with like self-promotion, and yet it can go a long way. So
Great, thank you.
Do it to the degree that feels authentic for you. It can be very helpful.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful.
We had a question earlier I just want to bring attention to. A graduate student had asked that they're currently working in tech and they're also currently in graduate school at the same time, and more power to you, by the way, Sahar. Is there any benefit in waiting to get your license before pivoting into tech full time? Is it possible to do both? Persons expressing concern about stepping out of tech when they already have their foot in the door.
So I did my license during, and I know someone who sort of made that transition and got the license afterward. I think probably what I would do if I were you is get like a psych assistantship. I'm in California, so I don't know what the rules are where you are, but do it in your sort of moonlighting time. I think you're probably right that stepping away from tech to me seems like the harder thing to go back to versus clinical work. So I would be inclined to try to work, you know, do those postdoc hours or whatever it is you need while staying in tech. It will suck though.
Yeah. Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was going to say, on the flip side, I'm not licensed, never been licensed. I went straight from graduate school into tech. I don't see patients on the side. I just make apps and I do stuff. So that's also a possibility.
Yeah, and
I don't ever
true.
want to take the
You can go
EPP
either
now,
way.
but
yeah, you can go either way. And you know, I'm old school, and I would say, you know, getting licensed is a terrible and great experience, and it's always a good fallback. But I will say, regardless, I mean, David just says he sees patients. I mean, you know, doing that, I often regret that I haven't seen patients in years. Doing that really kind of keeps me grounded, and I think gives me perspective and helps me deal with difficult situations at work as well.
I really love seeing patients. I think though, in terms of like scarcity and challenge, it's probably harder to get a good job in tech right now as a therapist than it is to just get those licensure hours. So that's why I would probably lean towards keeping that job at this point. I know that doesn't sound great, but that's what I would do.
Brittany had brought up asking like any advice regarding how to navigate establishing a start date in industry while juggling clinical work. You know, somewhat related to what we were just talking about, like needing a month or two to close cases or make referrals.
I think it's fine to negotiate. 2 months feels a little long, but if they're so desperate that they need you next week, that's probably not a place you want to go work. Like that to me is a sign of poor planning on their part. They're that desperate to have you and that they couldn't wait a month or something.
I would also say you could transition, right? You can say, look, I can start working for you, but I need my Fridays or something for the next 2 months, you know, to finish out these cases. Or, you know, I negotiated in mine, I said, you know, you kind of want me to continue to do this work because it helps me be better for you. And so I kept essentially, I think it was a Tuesday, and every Tuesday I was in the hospital doing stuff, and they knew that. but they were okay with that. So it depends on what role it is, it depends on what level it is, it depends on how much they want you, but I'd imagine you could easily argue for that transitional period.
All right. We still have 8 minutes left. I think we've been having a really enlightening conversation going, but yeah, do we have any other questions out in the audience?
Hi, sure. I'll go ahead and share. So my name is Michelle Castle, and I, first of all, really appreciate that something like this exists and that you're all here and willing to share your experiences and advice. So I am currently a postdoc in it's like primarily research fellowship in neuropsych and geropsych, and I do like 1 day a week of clinical work, which I do enjoy, but also, yeah, like I think it's a good split for me. And so my background is mostly in neuroimaging of cognitive control, mainly in aging and depression, and kind of the interaction of neurodegenerative diseases and things too. And so I'm just, I'm at this time where I'm like needing to transition into a job, right? I also am thinking about like applying for a K and stuff like that, but I'm just really interested in exploring what career options exist outside of the traditional academic route. Of course, sounds like everyone here obviously is interested in that, but yeah, so this group really seemed perfect for kind of helping figure that stuff out. And I literally just found out about this group and then saw that this talk was happening. So I'm just really appreciative. And I'm also kind of here to, just figure out how to branch into industry, tech, build community in this space, and starting postdoc during the pandemic in a completely different place and the isolation of that, it's been hard to feel connected to community and all of that. So I guess some of my questions I think have been answered already, and so that's really great. But yeah, I'm just kind of like, in some cases, like where to start and know like what I'm qualified for, because sometimes I see postings and things that it feels like, oh, in 10 years from now maybe I'll be qualified for that or whatever. So just that kind of advice, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
And Michelle, the ambivalence you feel is absolutely appropriate for your place in life. I remember that very, very well, and have mentored many people through Ks and that kind of thing. And you're probably in a context where that's what people do, and so you should be getting a K and probably maybe getting some pressure on that front. I will tell you that in Philips, like we actually have a venture. I was just talking to them today that's in the neuropsych space, and building a product that's automated battery, for neuropsychologists to use, for neurologists to use, and so forth. And they're trying to figure out, and they don't have the guidance of a neuropsychologist there all the time. And I just was trying to convince them today that they need that. So, that is probably fewer and farther between, but, you can certainly reach out to me and I can, keep you in mind or tell them about you. But just thinking, don't undersell yourself. Think about, you do have the capability to do a lot of this stuff. It may be hard if you're looking specifically in the neuropsych space, but you have a lot of options, and that's a good place to be, even though it feels like a crappy place to be sometimes.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. I really appreciate that.
I think, oh, sorry. I was just going to say briefly, I think particularly women see X years of experience and they go, oh, I don't have that, I won't apply. And it's like, no, don't do that. Stretch yourself. Worst case, they say no, right? But like very often those requirements are flexible.
Okay. Yeah. Good to hear.
Yeah. Also on Team Neuro, what's up? That's my background as well. And again, yes, like Christine said, and Mark said, you have the experience. It is just about what you can convince somebody you can do. Like nobody is going to look at your H index, how many publications you have, or blah, blah, blah. Just, hey, can I talk your language? Can you explain functional MRI results to somebody who can barely spell MRI? And like, how do you explain that? How do you kind of get that context across? I mean, to give you an idea, I'm mentoring a company right now that's doing remote monitoring assessment for folks with brain injury and cognitive injuries. So there's all kinds of things that you can be doing as far as, that's assessment, that's technology, that's, research. All of those things are, this company is just starting up. Those are the kinds of things they're going to need. And you get to really do whatever you want to do. If you can just come in and be like, hey, I'm a smart person, I have great skills, I'm pretty good to work with, right? Like, that's the thing that nobody tells you is like, yeah, are you good to work with? Do you know how many terrible people there could be in tech sometimes to like work with? I mean, that's the downside of this industry is, psychology is significantly more, I mean, stereotypically hugs and candles and throw blankets, right? As opposed to like tech where you got scooters and hoodies and free lunch, right? So it is a little bit of a culture clash, but I don't know where I was going on that tangent, so I'm going to stop talking now and bring myself back in. But yes, you got it. You can do it. We're behind you.
Well, thank you so much. And you guys can't see me right now, but I am smiling and really appreciate
I'll just add, Michelle, like if you have publications, that goes a long way in a lot of companies. So make that known on your application or in your cover letter or in your resume. It goes a long way. So yeah, and probably it's just a good experience to apply for those jobs. And if you're going to apply for K, that's great. I mean, all these are life experiences.
Sounds really good. Thank you.
All right. I think that about does it. I want to again thank all our speakers today for your wonderful input. I sure learned a lot. In terms of what we have coming up next with Therapists in Tech, in a couple weeks, we're going to be having another Fireside Chat. We'll be posting that on the website in the next few days, hopefully. And hopefully we'll be planning more content to come, but please come and join our Slack group. You can join us on Therapists in Tech that I'm going to be putting in the chat here. And everybody, you have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.